Okay, so then RH factors. So usually when we're talking about RH factors, we're referring, there are different types of RH factors, but when you use the ABO RH system, we're typically referring to RHD, and that's what we'll use for this class. So typically antigen D, and what we have here, so I don't think either book has a image showing what RH factor, but what I'm getting at here is that this RH factor is something separate from type A, type B. So again, this RH factor is neither A antigen, and it's not B antigen either. If you are type A, do you generate antibodies against B antigens? Yes, that's, yep, just rewind and go to the previous slides. All right, so Rh negative just means a lack of Rh factor and this antigen D. It does not mean you have a lack of antigens altogether. This is a separate thing from the ABO system. And again, Rh negative does not mean any antigens at all. So I'm trying to say, like, when you have a blood type and it's negative for a certain blood type, it just means it lacks that antigen. It doesn't mean that red blood cells totally naked without any antigens. And caution again, so again, our ABO group is different from RH. So again, we have A positive and A negative blood, B positive, B negative blood, and O positive, and etc. etc. So ABO is a different set of antigens than the RH antigens. So do not consider them one and the same. They're independent. So again, blood cells that have A antigens are not necessarily A positive. They can be A positive, they can be A negative. You just have to test whether the RH factor is there or not. And then positive, negative only refer to whether your red blood cells have this anti-antigen D or RH factor. So again, this A positive does not mean that you have A antigens on them, so again, having type A antigens does not mean you're A positive. You have to test for this additional factor. Yes, so the positive and negative only refer to that RH factor. So if you have RH factor on your red blood cells, you're whatever ABO, positive. If you don't have the RH factor on your red blood cells, then it's whatever ABO is, negative. So again, this common misconception I always see every year. Okay, so then if you break into subcategories, so the eight major blood types I want you to know. So you have the A antigen, these are both type A, but this person over here has the Rh antigen on their red blood cells, therefore they are type A positive blood using the ABO-Rh system. Whereas this person does not have Rh antigens on their red blood cells, so they are type A negative. Now B antigens, so people with type B negative blood, they're not going to have the Rh factor. Type B positive blood, they are going to have both the B antigen and the Rh. Now people with type AB negative blood, super rare, but what they're going to have is like the A and B antigens but no Rh. Whereas AB positive, you will have all three. You'll have A antigens, B antigens, and the Rh factor. Now type O, again, even though in this cartoon it looks naked, there are O antigens. They just lack A, they lack B, and they lack Rh. Again, this does not mean that they have no antigens whatsoever. They might have other antigens, they have the O antigen, but they just don't have A, B, or Rh. And then people with type O positive blood, they don't have A, they don't have B, but they do have the Rh factor. So this is the difference between the 8 major blood types with the ABO-Rh blood. Yep. So if you have O positive blood, yes, so they have type O antigens and Rh antigens, and they have a lack of A and B. So yes, that is correct. Okay, so type AB, so they have both A and B antigens. So they encounter A and B antigens free in their blood. Will they generate antibodies against these free A and B antigens? Well, again, remember your body produces antibodies against foreign antigens. So what if they shouldn't produce anti-A and anti-B antibodies? But what if something happened, something triggered their immune system, and then all of a sudden they start producing anti-A and anti-B antibodies. Well, so what if they produce anti-A and anti-B against these new these antigens? Well, their antibodies could attack their own red blood cells, and their immune cells could attack their own red blood cells, causing hemolysis. So this is autoimmunity. So here we have surface antigens. So this is what happens if you generate antibodies against or are exposed to antibodies that attack your own red blood cells. What happens is you have something called agglutination or clumping, and then notice that these red blood cells are rupturing. That's what we have with hemolysis. So again, agglutination, what do we have here? We have red blood cells and we have antibodies. And notice that these antibodies are, again, those binding sites, 2 per antibody. They're grabbing onto antigens, and by all these antibodies linking and grabbing onto these red blood cells, it causes this clumping we call agglutination. Now, I like to think of it this way. So here we have an inner tube, remember red blood cells, they kind of are an inner tube, except they're not hollow in the middle. So here we have a bunch of, pretend these are your red blood cells, these inner tubes. And okay, in the before times, and I know some people were not too responsible when they did this, but pretend that if all these inner tubes are like your red blood cells, all these little people are like antibodies. They have 2 arms and 2 binding sites that can grab onto red blood cells. So this is what agglutination is. Notice that all of these people are clumped together, and they're grabbing all these inner tubes and they're all clumping together. So agglutination is like that. The antibodies they stick to these red blood cells, and by sticking to these red blood cells, they cause them to clump together. So you have a big mass of these red blood cells and antibodies. Now, this is a common misconception. Agglutination is not the same thing as coagulation. Yes, they involve some things sticking to each other. So here's agglutination, here's coagulation. So agglutination here is on the left, coagulation is on the right. With agglutination, in terms of antibodies and red blood cells, it involves antibodies, but coagulation is what we covered in a previous lecture. These aren't antibodies, these are fibrin. This is fibrin fibers created by that coagulation cascade. So yes, agglutination is not the same thing as coagulation. So if you have your lab exams this week and you put agglutination when you should put coagulation or vice versa, sorry to say you're probably incorrect, because they are two. Again, red blood cells are involved in both, but different proteins and different mechanisms. So again, this is from immunoglobulins, and this is from fibrin, that coagulation cascade. So yeah, they sound similar, but they refer to different phenomena.